Good evening. Welcome to tonight's State of House of Representatives Candidate Forum, sponsored by the Lakeville Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm Brian Knapp, a member of the Lakeville Area Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Board of Directors and Lakeville residents. I work for mHealth Fairview Ridges Hospital and will serve as tonight's moderator. The timekeeper for tonight's forum will be Rebecca Gunderson of Farm Bureau Wealth Management and a Chamber of Commerce ambassador. Thank you, Rebecca. As Lakeville residents and school district families are represented by state representatives from 4 House districts, we invited all 8 candidates to join us for tonight's forum, with 5 able to attend. Brian Farr and Arena Prom, running for House District 20A, is unable to attend. We're going to invite a representative of Kayla Berg, running for House District 56B up front here, to provide an opening statement.
Hi. Good evening, Lakeville friends and neighbors. My name is Jackie Craig, and I'm excited to be here in support of Kayla Berg to represent folks in Minnesota House District 56B. Tonight, I'll be reading a short statement from Kayla as you consider voting for her to represent you. I will read it in her voice. 17 years ago, I became a flight attendant and joined my union. It was there that I found my voice and a purpose in advocating for the issues that affect working families. I'm passionate about a Minnesota that works for working families. That's why I support fully funding our public schools so that every child, regardless of where they live, has access to the very best possible education and a bright pathway to their own future. It's why I believe that access to quality and affordable health care is a human right, and I will work tirelessly to ensure that we all have health care, not just during a global pandemic, but always. We must take hold and immediate action on climate change. It was bold, not hold. Sorry, my finger was there. We must take bold and immediate action on climate change to protect this planet for our future generations. I have worked at the intersection of labor and environmental movements, and I know that the jobs and the environment are not mutually exclusive. We can create good union jobs with family-sustaining wages in the clean energy economy. Our children deserve to be safe in their schools and communities. I will work to make sure that all of us remain safe by supporting gun violence prevention measures, by investing in our infrastructure, transportation, affordable housing, and supporting small businesses. We can build a more just and equitable Minnesota, full of opportunity for everyone. As an essential worker during this pandemic, the safety and well-being of my community has become more important to me than ever. This is why I am keeping the families of my district, my team, and volunteers safe by not door knocking and not attending in-person forums that are held indoors. She also wanted to thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you. So this forum allows for those of you in attendance and at home to get to know each of the candidates better regarding business issues. We earlier held a random drawing to organize the candidates in attendance this evening. So beginning on my left, John Kosnick, running for House District 58A, Aaron Priest, running for House District 58A, Robert Bierman, running for House District 57A, Megan Olson, also running for House District 57A, and Roz Peterson, running for House District 56B. Thank you all for participating this evening. The format for tonight's forum will be as follows. In keeping with current COVID-19 safety requirements, candidates are spaced 6 feet apart and wearing masks when they are not speaking. Candidates were sent a list of potential questions in advance with the understanding that we would also take audience questions. For those in person tonight, question cards are located just inside the council chambers. Please write your questions down and give them to Chamber President Krista Jack, who's waving right now. For those listening live, you may email your question to Krista@LakevilleChamberCVB.org. That's Krista, Krista, at LakevilleChamberCharlieVictorBravo.org. Personal questions or questions directed to one candidate will not be accepted, and time will dictate how many questions we can pose to the candidates. Each candidate will receive 2 minutes for introduction and opening remarks, 2 minutes to respond to each question, and 90 seconds for wrap-up and closing remarks. A random draw before tonight's event determined the order for the candidates, and John Kosnick will start us off, and we'll then proceed clockwise with each candidate responding. With 30 seconds remaining, the timekeeper will hold up this card. Thank you. And when time has expired, they will hold up this card. Thank you, Rebecca. With each new question, we'll move clockwise to the next candidate. Are there any questions? All right. If not, let's get started. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their opening remarks. Let's begin with John Kosnick.
Thank you, Brian. Hello, I'm Representative John Kosnick, and thank you for tuning in. First, I want to give a shout out to my family who's watching at home, my wife Patty of almost 23 years and our 2 daughters. I know the sacrifice of public service is shared by families, so thank you and I love you. And just like your families, the last 7 months under COVID have changed our daily lives. Nobody asked for a pandemic, and it's rightly become the top priority. While many aspects are controversial, the response to the emergency was met with bipartisan support, including mine. We appropriated $500 million aiming at managing the response, and $200 million for healthcare providers to prepare, including mHealth Fairview. In addition, I advocated successfully for local governments to receive shares of the CARES funds. I'm proud to have supported the $4 million Lakeville received for our local needs. COVID is a serious health threat, and nobody wins. We will continue to do what is needed to manage the challenge. And as I've campaigned this summer, the concern and question I heard most is keeping our community safe and whether I support defunding the police. I don't. Having worked a lot on transit safety, I have earned the strong endorsement of the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. We must have responsive police and fire to keep us safe and to keep order. That's why on September 11th, I introduced the Community Safety and Security Act to help address the widespread lawlessness and safety concerns. There are many challenges that we will face at the Capitol. We have clear choices this election on what path we take, more radical or more reasonable. I have worked hard to provide results with reasonable leadership and experience for the roads ahead. I am State Representative John Kosnick, and I ask for your vote and support.
My name is Erin Priest, and I'm running for the Minnesota House of Representatives for 58A in Lakeville. I'm a teacher in Lakeville Public Schools, and I'm a mom of 2 girls who I'm proud to send to Lakeville Public Schools as well. I've also been an advocate at the state and local levels for gun violence prevention measures with a nonpartisan organization. And that's where I learned how to advocate with people from both parties and from multiple viewpoints on how to come to common sense solutions with really complicated issues. So my priorities in office will include making sure that everyone has access to affordable health care and prescription medications, making sure that we fully fund public education at the state level so we don't have to keep relying on local tax levies. I want to make sure that we pass gun safety laws that are supported by the overwhelming majority of Minnesotans. And I also want to make sure that we have tax fairness for families and small businesses so that our families in Lakeville can continue to thrive and that our small businesses can continue to survive through this pandemic that we've been facing. I also do support working with the police chiefs in Lakeville. I've met with him for a very productive conversation about police reform. And he and I both are in agreement about many of the reforms that we could take to improve public safety. So I'm going to be the best representative for Lakeville because my priority is to make sure that I'm listening to the people of Lakeville so I can represent the people of Lakeville and not just a political party. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakeville Chamber and all the members here tonight and watching on TV. Happy to be with you all. My name is Robert Bierman, running for re-election to District 57A. I am a small business owner, For 27 years, I've run our third-generation family flooring and home furnishings business. I understand what it takes to meet payroll month after month, year after year. I also served as a chamber president, and I know the work put in by members and the rewards they can reap by being active in their local chamber. So thank you, Lakeville Chamber, for all you do. This is a critical election year. Voters are faced with increasing turbulence in politics. Bad enough by 2018 that I felt compelled to leave my business and enter the fray of politics. We need level-headed experience to pull our country back to the center and away from the polarities. In my lifetime, the need for good governance and stable leadership has never been greater. The pandemic has only magnified the need. Using politics to battle a virus has proven futile. It has been bad for public health, it has been bad for education, and it has been bad for business, my business and your business. Politics over the pandemic has also held up much-needed bonding for a bonding bill that has languished for 5 additional months. This has not been good for the Minnesota economy. I sit on 4 House committees that focus on the critical areas that our states and our businesses face. Ever-increasing healthcare costs, a worse-than-the-nation education gap here in Minnesota, a growing need for affordable housing, and a climate crisis that we need to face. They all affect business and this state directly. But Minnesota is full of entrepreneurs, and I know that the spirit will conquer, and I am here to join you and lead. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm Megan Olson. I'm running for the 57A seat. I'm extremely thankful for the Lakeville Chamber of Commerce for stepping up and hosting this forum. It's really important that our voters are educated and they're able to see where we as candidates stand on a lot of really important issues. As the daughter of a small business owner, I know just how important legislation is that supports a positive business environment. Our current moment has created, with the broad executive orders, our current moment has disenfranchised many of our small businesses from the marketplace, in addition to leaving many of our community members jobless. My biggest priority in the upcoming legislative session would be rebuilding what has been broken due to the COVID-19 shutdown here in Minnesota by meeting business owners where they are right now and creating policies that uplift and encourage their growth. The release of federal CARE dollars earlier this summer should have never been stalled, and it should have passed on the first vote. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. So after the partisan games were over, Lakeville finally got their money to be able to have the opportunity to support their small businesses and maintain a functioning economy to stabilize the effects of the COVID shutdown. It's time for representations whose actions lines up with their words by prioritizing small businesses and in turn prioritizing the overall health of our community. As a member of the next generation of workers, I'm scared for the future of Minnesota's business environment. Overregulation and bureaucratic hoops make it difficult for young entrepreneurs to step up and enter the marketplace. I've heard this time and time again at the University of Minnesota and also from people here in my own community. People want to run their own businesses and they don't want the government doing it for them. Now is the time to support our small businesses by consistently listening to their needs and turning around to create policies that meet those needs. We need to listen and respond with action, not listen and respond with empty words. Once again, thank you to the Chamber for hosting this forum, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Lakeville Area Chamber, for hosting this in-person event and the City of Lakeville for accommodating a safe environment for us all to be together. My name is Roz Peterson, and I'm running for State Representative in House District 56B, which is portions of Burnsville and Lakeville. I've been married to my wonderful husband, Tim, for 33 years, and we have 2 grown children who attended Lakeville public schools and have graduated from college. And if anyone's hiring a chemical engineer, I have someone just for the job. I met Tim at Gustavus Adolphus College on a blind date, and I received a double major in business management and psychology. I graduated early, got married, and we opened up Lakeville Snyder Drug. Today, I am a commercial realtor with Cerrone Commercial Properties and have a commercial real estate business. I've served 2 terms in the legislature and 8 years on the Lakeville School Board. I've been an active volunteer in our community, including Hosanna Church. While in the legislature, I served as vice chair on the Health and Human Services Committee and vice chair of the Child Care Committee and was assistant majority leader. I've earned Business Person of the Year from the Lakeville Chamber, Spirit of Caring Award from 360 Communities, and Legislator of Distinction from the League of Minnesota Cities. I'm running because I felt that not all voices were being heard at the Capitol. I believe that our government should work for you, not the other way around. There needs to be balance in St. Paul, and the executive branch is too powerful without some checks from the legislature. During these unprecedented times and a projected $4.7 billion deficit, we need experience and creative solutions to help move us forward, jumpstart the economy, and get things back on track. I listen to all sides and look for common ground to find win-win solutions that work for all Minnesotans. Thank you.
Thank you all. We'll now move on to questions sent to candidates in advance. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the following questions about health care. Question about health care. Healthcare costs continue to increase each year for business owners, employees, and families. What is your plan to mitigate cost increases? And we'll begin with Erin.
So one of the major strains on small businesses in Minnesota is the cost of healthcare and providing it for their employees. I would propose expanding Minnesota Care model, because that's a way that people can buy into an affordable health plan when it's not able to be provided by their employer. Another thing that I would look for is during the pandemic, we've found creative ways of finding a new normal. So some of the things that we have begun to adopt now could become more commonplace and possibly save us money in the healthcare industry, such as video visits or looking at ways to digitize a lot of our records. And then, of course, we can't talk about healthcare costs without talking about the cost of prescription drugs. And I would hold big pharmaceutical companies accountable for price gouging. I believe that's a consumer protection that we need to have in place. We saw this year that there were political games being played at the legislature when it came to insulin. Insulin is not an issue for Republicans or Democrats. It's a human issue, and it's something that people need to live. And people should be able to get that medicine affordably. So I would make sure that we are working together to make sure that everyone in Minnesota can afford health care and to be able to get their prescription medications filled that they need to live. Thank you.
One of the main reasons I ran for office was the high cost of health care for my business, for my employees, and for their families. For nearly 3 decades, I've been running a business, and it hasn't mattered who's in the White House. The cost of health care continues to rise. This has been a bipartisan failure. The key thing to remember is this: other industrialized nations spend far less on health care and have better results. So the first thing we need to do is to secure the good things from recent years. Coverage of pre-existing conditions should be mandated by Minnesota HMOs. Permitting children to be covered on their parents' plan to 26 should stay. No cap on lifetime expense coverage. These are areas that, if the Republicans have their way, they will be taken down. Now, I know they talk about the fact that they are going to maintain all of these things, but they are actively engaged in legal suits to remove them. Minnesota Care should be a buy-in option for all Minnesotans. This is a revenue-neutral way to increase competition and drive down insurance prices. Taxpayers are already paying for this program and should have the option to buy in. Beyond this, there are 2 tracks for reforms. One is systemic, and one is immediate direct legislation. State legislation that I have ready to go that I've been working on and had 3 bills up, jacketed and ready to be dropped before COVID, in regards to copay reforms, premium reforms, and an importation bill. It is an outrage that Americans and American businesses pay so much more for pharmaceuticals. So I sat on the pharmaceutical task force. Even though I wasn't invited, I learned a lot from that, and I recommend all of you to read it. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan?
Did we skip John? I don't know. Oh, good. Okay. Just wanted to check. I'll take this off now. So I have a lot of personal experience with sole proprietor healthcare kind of ruining my family dynamic, if you will. So when Obamacare was passed into law a number of years ago, I was young. I was around the age of 13. My mom wasn't working at the time. My dad owned his own small business and still does, and my parents didn't go to college. My oldest sister has a really severe heart condition. She has an artificial heart valve, and so we really needed great health care. We needed full coverage of pre-existing conditions as well. So when Obamacare went into effect, our healthcare premiums actually ended up costing 3 times as much. And this forced my mom to make the difficult decision to, instead of staying at home with me at the age of 13, my sisters at 15 and 17, to go back to work no matter what the job was. Just pick a job that had good health care. And so that's what ended up happening, and it really shifted our family dynamic, and that's where I really began to think critically about policy and politics and how it's really pervasive in families' lives. Sole proprietors and small business owners' healthcare options were severely limited under the ACA, and premiums skyrocketed as well. My family isn't the only story like this. There's many other families out there that, both parents were working and didn't have great healthcare coverage, and they ended up losing it. They ended up paying the penalties for not having it because it was less money than what the premiums actually were themselves. So average Americans were screwed. Average Minnesotans were screwed under this. My policy stance is simple. We simply need less regulation and more price transparency. There needs to be 100% pre-treatment price transparency in healthcare and more competition in healthcare. We need to allow for businesses to be able to shop in the healthcare market, much like we shop for everything else, so Minnesotans can afford more diverse plans, because all Minnesotan families are diverse. Thank you.
No one likes surprise billing, high premiums, or finding out that your doctor is not in your network. The fact is, prior to Obamacare, Minnesota had the lowest cost, highest quality healthcare in the country. Then we became the 5th highest cost. In 2017, Republicans passed reinsurance that helped drive costs down up to 20% and passed measures to increase price transparency, such as posting the most common procedures and services and curbing surprise billing. Minnesota now ranks second in overall best healthcare system in the country and 4th in costs. However, more work clearly needs to be done, as real price estimates before service, for example, allowing more options such as short-term plans or customized healthcare coverages, and you should be able to see a local doctor whether they are in the network or not. Government-run healthcare is not the answer, and if you want to look at, have you ever renewed your driver's license recently, I think that's a pretty good example of why. Thank you.
Thank you. Since, as Roz had mentioned, in 2017, we did lead the nation with to lower healthcare premiums on the individual market for small business operators and entrepreneurs that use the individual healthcare market with the leading reinsurance program. Without the reinsurance programs, premiums would have increased an expected 50% this year. In fact, in 2020, as was mentioned, the rates range between a small 1.8% increase to a 20% decrease. So reinsurance brought stabilization of providers and coverage and increased competition from insurance companies for that business. I will continue to support reinsurance along with price transparency, telemedicine, and continuing to fight against taxes on care, like the sick tax that was supposed to sunset. Again, as the state faces at least a $4.5 billion deficit, and probably closer to $6 if Democrats get the additional spending that they want this year, we can't go the Democrats' route of creating new programs which would be more expensive to the state and help fewer people. Democrats raised health care taxes by more than $1 billion, and they want the state to take over our health care system, leaving us with fewer options for care. You simply can't lower the cost of health care by increasing taxes on health care.
Thank you. For those listening live, you may email your question to krista@lakevillechambercvb.org. That's Krista, Krista, at lakevillechamber.org. Our next question regards hospitality and tourism. COVID-19 has devastated the hospitality and tourism industry. The industry continues to bear a large burden as capacity restrictions remain for restaurants and events. Hospitality and tourism attract families, athletic tournaments, weddings, meetings, and more, all of which generate revenue and income for our community. What will you do to advocate for these businesses? And we'll begin with Robert Bierman.
Thank you. The pandemic has been very uneven as to how it has hit businesses. As a small business that was shut down, I understand the pain of this business, or this pandemic, and what it has caused and done to businesses. It has not been equally shared, but the conversation must begin with the cause of the problem. The problem is, and we need to stay focused on, it is that it is a pandemic. And the fumbled national response and federal plan, lack of a federal plan, has resulted in deaths that lead the world. The best thing we can do to help hospitality, to help restaurants, to help every business from Main Street on, is to get the virus under control, as other countries have done, and this is a very linear exercise. We need to stop the community spread. I remember when the pandemic was upon us, and there had not been no government shutdown called, but business trailed off very quickly in the weeks before the pandemic, before the shutdown. And consumer confidence is going to be the key to bring this back. We're open now. Business is better. But the last thing I want is another shutdown. So we need to deal with the pandemic first. Round two, we're going to need federal help on this, but round two of the Federal CARES Act will help hospitality in particular. It has been targeted toward that. My understanding is there's about $400,000 in grants coming this way that will be released, and the businesses will need to have that supplied. This is something that is going to take time, and the challenges that hospitalities and restaurants face in particular will continue to need our support. So the best thing we can do is support them locally and help them weather this storm.
I think our understanding of the virus is exponentially better now than it was when all of this started in March. It's point-blank time for hospitality and tourism industries to open fully, and I think we're in a place where we can do that now. The leisure and hospitality industry unemployment rate is up 29% from last year, and I've spoken to several business owners as well as myself working at a coffee shop a few days a week working in the industry about how a lot of people were ready to open earlier than the governor deemed okay. A lot of these businesses were able to educate themselves on proper social distancing techniques, mask wearing techniques, and enforcement in order to be able to open up sooner than what the Governor Walz has said. I think it's embarrassing that 2 weeks has turned into 2 months, has turned into 6 months. We're at a point now where we can understand this virus better. We're all wearing masks and going out in public just as we were before. And so I think it's time for us to reopen. And I just hope that the Federal CARES Act Round 2 gets a yes vote on the first chance from my opponent this time.
It has been sad to see so many businesses close and struggle and so many events canceled. Losing these businesses does have a trickle-down effect on our economy, and I want to commend Megan what she's already said. This has been devastating. Restaurants cannot exist at partial capacity, and if we do need to have some restrictions that are necessary, I think that those decisions need to be made at a more of a local level than one person in St. Paul who has no idea what it's like to live here in Lakeville. So, and the other reason why I'm opposed to that is because there seems to be picking winners and losers, and I also believe that they're overstepping their bounds, whether it's within our families or in our churches. So in my opinion, that if this continues the way it has been continuing, which, by the way, there seems to be no end in sight, it's just supposed to go on into perpetuity, I believe the government is treading on eminent domain ground, and our government will need to compensate these businesses for lost revenue. I believe in the principles of personal responsibility and freedom, and many of the other countries, for example, Sweden, is taken that approach, and it has worked for them, and I'm sure it can work for us. Thank you.
Within a few days of the government shutdown, the majority of newly employed were in the hospitality or tourism industry. And they continue to struggle, and as the cold moves in, outdoor patio seating is becoming less popular. At first, this is a critical driver to our economy and labor force, these industries, and they reflect the segments that are already also closed, other segments. Over the Easter break, I worked with my colleagues that something needed to be done and introduced a bill on a Tuesday, passed it, and got it signed by Friday in 4 days. That bill was to permit restaurants to sell wine and beer to go and with their food takeout orders, and they can still do that. That has helped stave off layoffs and infuse needed cash back into these businesses. And it's not easy to pass any bill, but being able to do this in such a short time reflects on the bipartisan relationships that are so important, and I'm proud to have at the Capitol. Don't be fooled into thinking that nothing gets done or we don't get along. This will be one of my proudest accomplishments because what it stood for, families and jobs. It also recognized the serious economic challenges that would follow after the first shutdown and closures. Recently, I signed on to a letter to Governor Walz critical of the threatening tone and the militant enforcement of new regulations and threats of heavy fines on these businesses. We do need to comply with the standards that are set out, but the state must work with and educate and correct first before threats of fines and ruining businesses and dreams. As customers, we also need to be aware of health guidelines and practice them as hard as they are to help our favorite places stay open and our neighbors stay healthy. The legislature should be involved in that progress of reopening and adjusting to new guidelines. And I'm hearing a lot of spending from my opponents across the aisle, and I'd like to see how they're planning on paying for it.
COVID-19 is a public health emergency that has killed almost 200,000 Americans and almost 2,000 Minnesotans. We need to take it seriously, and the longer we don't and we play games with the health of our fellow Minnesotans, the longer this emergency will persist. So each of us plays a role in our individual responsibility of making sure that we are following those health guidelines to keep ourselves healthy, but also to keep our neighbors and our community healthy. And if we are able to do that, then we will be able to keep businesses open. If we are not following the guidelines, then this will go on for a long time. This is something that we have not seen before, and so it calls for serious and immediate action to stop the virus. One of the things that I would do as well to support small businesses that are struggling is to make sure that we are expanding our government loan program to make sure that small businesses are able to weather this storm. There are some very smart targeted investments we can make in small businesses in order to keep people employed and make sure that they are able to keep their job and make sure that small businesses are keeping their doors open so that we will come out on the other side of this with a strong, healthy economy.
Thank you. Just a reminder to the candidates to please watch the timekeeper for the 30-second warning and stop time. So our next question regards business retention. Each candidate has 2 minutes to answer the question. What changes would you make to attract and retain businesses and improve the overall business climate in Minnesota? And we'll begin with Megan Olson.
I think now more than ever with the COVID-19 pandemic, the best thing and the biggest thing we can do is simply lower taxes for businesses to spur job growth and rekindle everything that we've lost due to the pandemic. Businesses not only support our local economy by creating jobs, but they also enrich our community by providing spaces for connection. You know, we have these small business loans given out by the federal CARE dollars, given out by the state government, the federal government as well. And so I think in order to complement those loans, we need to lower taxes and talk about giving some tax credits as well for this next session for small businesses in order to give back businesses what they've lost and to ensure that they can continue to employ our fellow community members here in Lakeville and in Apple Valley, where I'm seeking to represent as well.
As a lifelong Minnesotan and a business owner in this community, I love the quality of life that we have here in Minnesota. Lakeville and Burnsville have a lot to offer. However, as a commercial realtor trying to attract businesses to come here, it's a little bit harder to do because of the high burden that they pay in property and income tax. Minnesota ranks 4th in highest corporate tax rate at 9.8% and 5th highest income tax rate at 9.85%. Commercial and industrial property also pays 1/3 of all property taxes, yet represents only 13% of the value. That's why I passed legislation eliminating the automatic inflator on commercial and industrial properties. However, it has been reintroduced by the other side of the aisle, and if they get their way, that's where it will go. No tax should automatically be increased without going through the full legislative process. Businesses are people, and the majority of jobs and wage growth comes from small businesses. It's extremely difficult to open a small business here due to the overwhelming regulations that are coming from local and state government, let alone the exorbitant fees and long processes involved. Adding onerous mandates onto these small businesses simply creates more barriers and more disparities. In summary, stop adding mandates, roll back some of the regulations that go too far, and reduce taxes for small businesses, including pass-through entities.
As we know, we are losing businesses and many are closing for good. Restaurants and retail is struggling. There is a more serious issue. This is a more serious issue than I think people realized. The state is facing new challenges, like a staggering deficit. And I'm not hearing that from the other side, acknowledging that. We must create the great Minnesota comeback by reducing burdens and regulations on businesses to safely reopen our economy. This can be done to start with in regions, like we have for schools. The legislative members with businesses and health experts should be involved in determining our next steps. I am open also to a negotiated but quite basic capital bonding bill for only core projects until we get a better idea on our long-term budget situation. I'm serious. We're facing a $4.5 billion to $6 billion deficit, and the other side doesn't seem to recognize that. It's irresponsible if we pass supplemental spending and Democrats' $1.3 billion, the largest bonding bill in state history, without knowing what our future balance sheet looks like. Doing that now makes the next budget cycle that much more difficult. And please tell us how you plan to pay for all this spending that you've mentioned. Also, the question Democrats need to ask is, what taxes will they raise to pay for their spending? Sales tax, they already voted for that. Gas tax, a 70% increase was introduced, and they voted for that. And they already voted for income and corporate taxes, the last thing that we would need to restore our economy. Their strategy and math doesn't add up, and we need leadership and experience to get results, not empty rhetoric and failed rhetoric.
So to make sure that we are improving a better climate for businesses in the future in Lakeville and in Minnesota, I'd want to look at the overall system and see how it's functioning system-wide. This could include making changes to the tax laws to make sure that it's advantageous for small businesses. We could simplify the tax code by making sure that our wealthiest Minnesotans and the large corporations are paying their fair share. We don't want to have that small businesses put at a disadvantage. and make sure that they are paying more than what they should be. I would also be for looking at regulations that should be changed. If there are unnecessary regulations, such as in the golf industry, they had a regulation that 16-year-olds couldn't drive the lawnmower. That seems like an unnecessary regulation. So I would look for input from people in the industry to find out which regulations make sense and which just don't make sense. And that's something we could work together on in a bipartisan way with input from the business industry to make sure that we are making choices that make sense to protect workers, but also to make sure that businesses can stay open. And I think when we're looking at the different ways we can tackle this crisis that we're in right now, both financially and in a health crisis, we need to remember that in the 2011-2012 time at the bottom of the housing market, Minnesota was in a $6 billion deficit with no money in reserves. Now, by 2013, a year later, we were out of debt, and we are also able to fund all-day kindergarten. So it's been done before. This year in 2020, we're at about a projected $2.4 billion deficit, but we also have $2.3 billion in reserves. So we are in a much better position than we were in the past, and we can absolutely do this again. Thank you.
We often hear about proposals for small business growth, but we don't see enough incentives that focus on small businesses when tax bills are actually enacted. The tax incentives and the deductions awarded are usually to the largest corporations. They have the lobbyists, they have the lawyers, they have the loopholes. We've seen how trickle-down works. Version 3.0 in 2017 added nearly $2 trillion to the national debt instead of creating jobs and growth. We need to establish a House committee on small business at the Capitol and focus on the small business needs to target proposals aimed at helping those small businesses thrive. For starters, a first employee tax credit or even a second employee tax credit would help incentivize businesses to expand their workforce and increase hiring. Also, I believe a modest percentage of sales tax retention for realtors for being state tax collectors is in order. We also need to increase the access to renewable energy tax credits for solar on rooftops of businesses and energy efficiency and charging stations on parking lots. Those would help businesses receive those credits to expand and help the economy as well. And we need to, as we mentioned before, expand the public health care option to help businesses retain those or lower their health care costs. And finally, I also believe small businesses need the Paid Family Medical Leave Act to compete with the larger corporations. This is something that, as I've studied it more and more and looked at it, how it would impact my business, is sorely needed for the workers, the families, and the small businesses across this state.
Thank you. For those listening live, please email your question to Krista@LakevilleChamberCVB.org. That's Krista, Krista, at LakevilleChamberCharlieVictorBravo.org. Our next question regards partisan politics. We've alluded, I think, in a few of our comments tonight to partisan politics. The question is, the political climate seems especially reactive this year amid the coronavirus pandemic. What would you do to work with your peers on both sides of the aisle to ensure that Minnesota businesses and residents are considered above partisan politics? And we'll begin with Roz Peterson.
Thank you, Brian. It is extremely important to me to listen to all sides. I want to find common ground and address concerns in order to not only find something that works for everyone, but also will be lasting legislation. It's one of the reasons I was involved in the Civility Caucus, and that helped foster relationships between members. I also work closely with bipartisan organizations, the expert in their field, such as work on temporary health care dwellings with the League of Minnesota Cities, housing issues with the realtors, lower costs and increase access with the Minnesota Pharmacy Association and the Medical Association. And I also brought people together by forming the Commercial Real Estate Caucus. It was bringing like-minded trade groups with bipartisan and bicameral members of legislators. In order to pass a bonding bill, all the Dakota County legislators worked together to pass the SMART Center, which is a mental health training center for police officers, and updating the Billisby Dam, a clean energy project. These are some things, but I'm always looking for more ways to connect with folks and find real solutions that we can agree on. Relationships take time, and I'm willing to put in the hard work and to get things done for everyone, but in particular for our community.
I'm next, right?
You are.
Democracy and policymaking is designed to be slow and deliberative. The process of improving an idea is important as we work through the legislative process. And it's been interesting to me to learn and witness that we generally do get along better than what the media would portray. And how you maneuver the personalities in the process is the difference. Building individual relationships has been key for me, and it takes a lot of time and work. If you can't do that and nobody likes you, you can't even get a little bill hearing. Lakeville can be proud that I was elected by my peers to be an assistant leader, and that has helped me better advocate for our district. In passing legislation successfully, like the Orange Line funding, Moore County Road funding, I lowered the income tax rate in the middle bracket. I've stopped sales tax and gas tax increases. I helped fund Dakota County Technical College Technology Center. The Regional SMART Center that Roz had just mentioned is an excellent thing that we were doing before it became a crisis for first responders. And historic funding for our schools. While I take hits from the left and the right sometimes, I don't misunderstand my laid-back demeanor. I'm a fighter, and you need to stand on your values at certain times. I personally try to stay away from the far left and the far right issues and don't spend a lot of time on them because that's not what gets passed, and it's mostly a waste of effort. In fact, over the last 6 years of service, I find that we do have shared values and try to unite around those values that we agree on here in Lakeville. Strong and safe communities, quality education, compassion for our neighbors, and efficient government functions so that families can thrive and achieve more fulfilling lives with less government. Relationships and rising above partisan politics has allowed me to deliver results for Lakeville.
So I would be a bipartisan representative because I'm able to listen to people. In the last year, my team has made over 10,000 calls to people in Lakeville, and we're reaching out to people across the political spectrum. And my job is to listen to them. Many of the conversations are wonderful, and we agree on many things, and some of the conversations are hard, and finds out that we are not agreeing on everything. And that's okay. I'm willing to sit down and have those uncomfortable, hard conversations with people. And what I'm finding out at the end of it, there's almost always something that we find that we agree on. And that's the skill and the type of work I would do at the Capitol to make sure that I am able to work with people of both parties. I would listen to anybody that comes to my office. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, I will sit down and talk with you. And I would seek input from people in those industries that are impacted by certain pieces of legislation and make sure that I'm understanding what is best for people of Lakeville. So I would represent Lakeville well by listening to everyone here and making sure that I am actually representing what Lakeville wants and not just a rubber stamp for a political party. Thank you.
This is a really good question. This is what you're hiring us to do, get things done. for Minnesota. And I think for chamber members, it's important to think about the fact that when you're in the chamber offices and you are sitting down with chamber members who are united in their business interests of furthering their economic growth in the community and their own businesses in particular, there's common things that we agree on at the local chamber. And, you know, the problems of healthcare costs, the problems of workforce training, the need for public education, a transportation system that moves product and people and goods through the system, and affordable housing. And we can agree on all the needs of those things. And then I think about, too, when I go back to my own office and I think about how we are going to expand our market share, and we need to invest in product for that, or technology, or space, or training for our employees. It all costs money for those items as well to make your business grow. We have been on a nearly 40-year quest in this country to defund government, and the results are showing. Student debt is the second highest form of debt in the country after mortgage debt. We're not investing in our young people like we used to. Our road and transportation system is falling further behind international competitors each year. Our infrastructure in our communities is 40 to 50 years old, some of these things. It reminds me of the business adage that you can't cut your way to profitability. So I think it's important when we talk to our colleagues that we continue to ask colleagues and continue to discuss these issues. How important is it to invest in those things that help a business thrive, an economy work, and take care of our citizens?
Thank you.
I think you hit the nail on the head when we talk about not investing in our young people. And as a young person, I think it's really important that we see more young people in the legislature. And so just this last week, I was able to be a member on a panel discussing political discourse and political intimidation with other leaders of my generation. And it was really interesting to hear from conservatives, liberals, Republicans, Democrats, whatever anyone identified as, hearing from both sides and both having experienced political intimidation. And so it was a really unique opportunity to connect with people all over the country over the same issue. And this is an issue I hold really near and dear. I wrote a letter to the editor earlier this year about this and was able to lecture on it at a health science university in Bloomington earlier this March. And so I think it's really important for us to look at the way we're having conversations, and instead of coming forward and looking at it as an argument, looking at it as a discussion. Maybe I'm not here to change your mind. I know you have your opinions, we all have our opinions. But let's come together and have a discussion on where those commonalities lie in there and how we can piece those together like a puzzle to come up with a policy that represents our diverse constituencies. And so I think we need representation who understands that we're all Minnesotans and we can't just represent our own political parties. We need to represent the community who elected us as well.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to questions from the audience, and this question was emailed in. Again, you'll have 2 minutes to answer. Given the multi-billion-dollar projected deficit this year, what taxes would you be most comfortable raising to address the deficit? And we will begin with John Kosnick.
I think I heard the premise of the question. I guess we don't really need to rehash it. I guess I was going to ask you that. There are no taxes that I think we need to raise. We are in on the edge of a dire economic challenge and recession. The last thing that businesses and families need is the government taking more and more out of their pockets. It was mentioned that we're on a 20-year quest to defund government. Well, in the state of Minnesota, I believe around 2009 or 10, the general fund budget was $34 billion. And next year, on base spending, it's going to be about $50 billion. So I'm not sure where we're cutting that. And so as government has gotten larger and larger, I think it's time for government to find ways to streamline. We need to get rid of waste and fraud and abuse. There's been proposals that have been consistently rejected to make sure that those that are receiving services are actually qualifying for those services, and we constantly get roadblocked from administering some of those challenges, or making sure that those people qualify and that we're able to help the people those programs are intended to help with. And so I would not raise any of the taxes. But interestingly enough, we heard it here. We're going to raise the corporate tax. We're going to raise the tax on the most wealthy. And then also paid family leave, by the way, is a $2 billion tax on the business and the employee. And so I think there's a very big difference and philosophical difference here between Republicans and Democrats. And Republicans will be there to protect your families, to protect your freedoms, and protect our futures.
So the deficit is a serious problem that we need to address. It's not something we can pass on to our kids and grandchildren to solve later down the road. I think the main part of being financially responsible is being able to pay for your bills. So one of the things I would do is to make sure that we are closing loopholes in our tax code that allow the wealthiest of us in Minnesota and in the country to pay little taxes and in many cases no taxes at all. I don't think that Jeff Bezos, as a billionaire, should be paying fewer taxes than I'm paying as a teacher. So I would make sure that, yes, we are raising taxes and having on the wealthiest Minnesotans and on the largest corporations to make sure that they are paying their fair share. As a teacher in public education, I know that we are training the workforce of tomorrow. And I think that people who have done well in our system should be part of paying for the future generation to make sure that they are trained just as well and that they can be successful as well. Thank you.
I think Aaron is correct on that we need a fair tax system. The tax cuts that have been in play recently have gone to the largest corporations and the highest income owners, and they are permanent tax cuts. 2017, probably everybody in this room, got a small tax cut, which will last 4 years. The other tax cuts that the 83% of the tax cuts went to, keep those permanently. And so tax rates for the highest income have consistently gone down, and we, in the middle, have been footing the bill, or the federal government as the debt rises. So there does come a time when you do have to rebalance that a little bit. And nobody wants to add a tax. I don't want an additional tax on my business, but I think it's time for small businesses to have some of those tax cuts and some fairness. Why is it that unearned income is taxed at a lower rate than earned income? One of the other things that was mentioned was a gas tax. You know, everybody in the chamber, we talk about transportation and the need for better roads. You know, those are not going to come by themselves. So we have to have some form of a revenue stream to put money into the roads of our state, especially when we have the 5th largest number of roads in the nation, and our tax rate is around the 30th. So gas tax has been idle for a while. That would be a good one. The other one is the global intangible low taxed income. We could have raised $750 million last year to pay for education with that.
I would echo what Representative Kosnick said about raising taxes, and the correct answer for me would be none. I think as a matter of principle and as a matter of the times right now, you know, everyone's been saying we are one Minnesota, we're in this together. Well, then we shouldn't be raising taxes. We shouldn't be placing the burden on certain Minnesotans and not others. So just as a matter of principle, I don't think that I would be comfortable raising any taxes to deal with the deficit. I think instead we should be looking at waste, fraud, and abuse. In 2018 and 2019, a lot of fraud and abuse was uncovered, and no one did anything about it. So it's time we start taking a deeper look at that. It's time we start taking action on that and using the saved funds from finally addressing that issue to deal with this deficit in 2021.
I'll echo the comments that John and Megan have already made. You know, in 2013, we had taxes raised on corporations, and there's a 4th tier added to income taxes, so that's 0.85% apparently, which is one of the highest in the nation, is apparently not enough of their fair share. And meanwhile, our state's budget has grown 142% over the past 24 years to $88.9 billion. We need to be smarter about how we utilize the resources that we have, and so that we can help keep hardworking Minnesotans money in their pocket, especially during these difficult times. The burdens cannot be put on the business community anymore. We're already paying a much greater share than any other income so far in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota's tax rate is extremely progressive. It is not like there's no one paying taxes at the high end. And by the way, we tax the poor quite highly here as well. We tax pretty much everyone. We're very equal opportunity when it comes to those things. But now is the time that we can actually make sure that our government is working better for the people of Minnesota. This is an opportunity for innovation and creativity and to look at things differently so that we can be a better place to live and grow and build your business and raise your family. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a second emailed audience question regarding school funding, and we'll begin this round with Aaron Priest. What will you do in the legislature to ensure we don't have to keep coming to the citizens of Lakeville to fund area schools?
So what we've seen happen in recent years in the legislature is that these mandates that keep being passed by the legislature are not being funded. So the schools are required to take new actions and fund new programs, even with no new funding from the state to cover that. So what we do is we have to keep taking money out of our general education fund to pay for those mandates. So in Lakeville alone, that comes up to $12.5 million every single school year. That's money that could be spent on teachers to lower class sizes, technology, student support workers that we need so badly in our schools, and school security as well. And so I would make sure that we are fully funding public schools at the state level so that we don't have to keep choosing between pulling it out of our student services and things that would make our schools even better, and then asking our citizens to raise our own taxes. We've been lucky, frankly, that our tax levies have been passing the last couple times, but I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think we can ask people to keep raising their own taxes. And frankly, I don't think it's fair. I don't think property owners and small businesses here should have to shoulder that burden. So it shouldn't matter which zip code you live in Minnesota. I believe all children in Minnesota should have an equal chance to be successful. And that would come from a robust funding from the state. Thank you.
I would agree wholeheartedly with Aaron's comments on how to fund education through the state. We're actually funding education at a lower number than we were back in 2006. So, and we're asking the schools to do so much more, and they are faced with new problems and new issues, which we are looking to schools to solve, and we're not helping them. School counseling is one. If you talk to teachers and you talk to school counselors, you will learn pretty quickly that there's been an explosion of mental health issues among our student body. This needs to be addressed. This isn't going to be zero cost. And we need to put the resources into the schools that are required so that we can help these students, instead of having the school counselors even the academic counselors being forced to deal with mental health issues at such a high level, we're losing that connection between career counseling for those students moving forward. And this is something, I experienced at the high school level, but when I got to the elementary level, and I had a long sit down with teachers there, and the last question I asked was, what about mental health? And they said, that's the biggest issue we face for my 5th grade class. We have a lot of mental health issues that we need to triage right here. So I will say that we need to recognize the fact that We are not funding our schools like we used to. Fully funding at the state level is the answer. It shouldn't be forced on communities. It should be more balanced throughout the state. We need to build in an inflation adjuster as well to these budgets for schools, because when you pass a bill for education in one biennium and you jump to the next, you have essentially just given the school budgets a cut.
I think this question also begs another question of how transparent and how accountable are our schools. I'm a 2017 graduate of Eastview High School in District 57 over in Apple Valley, and I had the opportunity to connect with teachers who were my teachers 4 short years ago, and now having the opportunity to run, I was able to have a great sit-down conversation and hear from them firsthand, what would you like to see changed, and what are the politics of the schools that I somehow missed when I was, politically engaged, but in your high school and in your classroom? And it all kind of came down to a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability. And what they're seeing is these levies keep coming through and the taxes keep being raised and the money keeps going into a slush fund, and it's not going into the per pupil funding into the students that it should be. The teachers aren't seeing any of it. It's going a lot to the administrators. And so I think we need to do a little bit more of an intense auditing system of where exactly that money is going, and then release it and have it in a platform that is easy for Lakeville residents, for Apple Valley residents to see. Don't have it hidden on some secret page on some website. Have it in the newspaper. Have it available for you as taxpayers to be able to see where exactly is my funding going. Is it helping my kid in his 5th grade classroom and his teacher? Is it helping my student in high school get mental health services? So I think we really do need to take a look at transparency and accountability in education in order for us to move forward and have a deeper conversation about funding.
As a former school board member, public education is near and dear to my heart, and I will just agree with what Aaron said about the unfunded mandates. They are real, and it is hurting our students, and I'm also going to agree with what Robert said about mental health. Mental health is a big issue. In fact, it is extremely devastating with what's been happening in our educational system. So I am very worried, actually, about a whole generation of students right now that aren't necessarily getting the best education possible. And I think if you ask a parent that, they will agree. However, I just want to give you a couple statistics. The budget of the general fund budget, education is 42% of that, and in the last biennium budget, they had a $388 million 2 and 2% formula fund increase, a $90 million for special education cross-subsidy reduction, so there's work been done on that. And there's another $46 million to maintain the preschool programs, and $30 million for one-time funding for safe schools. So there was an increase of $543 million for a total increase of $1.2 billion over the 18-19 biennial budget. And when I was in the legislature, there was also some increases as well. So my question is how much is fully funding our schools? Because I think we have to look at how we're educating our kids. Terry Lynn said last night, we are not going back to the way we used to do things before because of what we've found out. So how can we look at things a little bit differently? Look at Finland, for example. Their test scores or their achievement levels are much higher than ours, and they spend less time. So it's an opportunity. I look at it.
Well, thank you for the question. And when it comes to education funding and people talk about fully funding education, you hear this a lot from the teachers union. And I don't know that people know how much it is. So we're facing at least a $4.5 billion deficit, and I would argue with some additional spending that is being proposed, it's going to be closer to $6 billion. Fully funding our schools, as the unions suggest, is another $5 billion or roughly on top of that. So I'm not sure how we get there, and I think that before that, we need to instill some accountability. And yes, there are some unfunded mandates and some other reforms that need to be done. But I think rather than cutely saying we need to fully fund education, also tell us how we're going to pay for it. because, as was mentioned, the levies, if communities want the additional education dollars, that's probably an easier way to do it because the state is broke. And that doesn't seem to be resonating here. But another area that I have a concern on, something that I wasn't aware of 6 years ago when I became a state representative, and I've worked on it, is the achievement gap in Minnesota between kids of color and white students. Our education system has failed too many students of color for too long. We have among the worst achievement gap in the country, and as our state continues to be more diverse, this issue is not improving, and we are losing needed talent and letting these families down by not providing all students with a quality education. I have authored and supported bills and initiatives to address this crisis, and I'm grateful for the support and work that the Lakeville schools and the Rosemont, Eagan, Apple Valley districts have given my efforts. But we need to do more across the state. The soft bigotry of low expectations has to end, and fair opportunity and strong education will better prepare our future workforce.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question before closing remarks. Our next question is about transportation funding, and we'll begin with Robert Bierman. The question is, what transportation funding changes, if any, are needed to ensure current and future Lakeville and regional area infrastructure needs are met? Would anyone like that repeated?
Yeah, maybe.
Yes, okay. What transportation funding changes, if any, are needed to ensure current and future Lakeville and regional area infrastructure needs are met? And we'll begin with Robert Bierman.
I think that the streams of transportation funding that we have right now, with partially a gas tax, with partially a portion of the rental vehicles being put on there, and a partial from the parts, automotive parts, all need to be retained first and foremost. And then we need to look at, as I had said earlier, a marginal increase on the tax, the gas tax, because that over a 4-year period, as was proposed, would be something that we would put in 2 cents each 6 months. And I think that would help us immensely get a stream of money toward roads and transportation that we're going to have to get from somewhere. And that still is a proposal that I believe is a good one. We also need to do some more road funding through bonding bills, if we can ever get a bonding bill passed. And we need to figure out ways that we can access more funding through a bonding bill to take care of the road issues that we have and we're all experiencing throughout the county. Thank you.
I would echo that we do need a bonding bill passed and we need to fund our roads here in Lakeville. But I think a gas tax only hurts middle-class families, and especially we're talking about the pandemic. We're in the midst of a pandemic. It would hurt the people who we say we're trying to help most. And so I think that's something that should be off the table, not only for this upcoming legislative session, but indefinitely. I think, as Mrs. Peterson said earlier, talking about new and creative ways to come up with funding, this is another opportunity for us to look at past ways and streams of funding and look at new ways to be able to fund what we need. And so really having that open mind and having fresh and new faces at the table to be able to come up with those new and creative ways to fund transportation and fund education and all these other things that we have a deficit but we need money for, I think is our best solution coming forward in 2021.
Transportation funding is near and dear to my heart. However, I know that Representative Kosnick is more well-versed in this topic than I. However, when I was in the legislature, we worked really hard to try to dedicate all sales taxes that came from auto-related sales to help fund our roads and bridges, because they are extremely important to moving goods and services around, moving people around. However, look at the pandemic on how things changed in the way that we do business, including Do I really need to drive into the office? Maybe I will continue to work from my office in my home, or maybe I will work from my office at my lake place, or maybe I will move to the country, for example. There's a lot of different changing things happening. However, making sure that our roads and bridges are working for us and moving people around are important. Another thing that we looked at a little bit more is artificial intelligence, such as driverless cars. You know, wouldn't that be something that we should look into a little bit further and figure out how we can help move people around? And there's, I know, a lot of work that was done for people with disabilities, and having that type of technology would really allow a lot more freedom for people to move around, and it's more affordable, believe it or not, as well. So all those things are very, very important, but I do not support a gas tax, just as Megan brought up. It hurts those that we're trying to help most. It hurts the working poor in particular into getting to their jobs so that they can put food on their table for their families. So, thank you.
Thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm not sure it's true, though, but yeah, transportation is I've been the vice chair of the Transportation Policy Committee and sat on that committee for the last 6 years, and suppose I would continue to serve on that committee, maybe even chair it. But transit has changed significantly since March. The other day I was driving by Fleet Farm, and I was just kind of curious about the park and ride and how many cars are there. Normally it's filled about 800 cars a day, people commuting, parking here in Lakeville and commuting to downtown Minneapolis. Do you know how many cars were in the parking lot? There was about 5, and 2 of them had been there parked long term and had their windows smashed and somebody broke into them.
Oh, no.
The transit system is under major, major change, and we need to understand it a little bit better before we continue to invest in more light rail train programs. In your $1.3 billion bonding bill, there's an incredible amount of money for train planning. Ridiculous. We need to scrap that out and take a look at the deficit that's coming up so that you can do more for your roads and bridges. The gas tax I understand your argument. I'm opposed to it because it does hurt families that can least afford it. But also, we need to recognize, as Representative Peterson pointed out, the amount of miles that people are driving now is less, and cars are becoming more fuel efficient, so the gas tax isn't the workhorse that it used to be for our roads and bridges. But as we adjust and take a look at how much transit dollars are being spent and how much transit is being utilized, I think there may be an opportunity, and I know you're not going to like it, but to more efficiently reorganize our transit system. And the $400 million that we fought so hard for to put into our roads and bridges, I'm going to just lay it out there a little bit. We are facing a major deficit, and I will be the first to admit that that $400 million may temporarily go to cover basic services outside of transportation. And we need to think of ideas like that. Otherwise, we're in a world of hurt. We have to have a balanced budget. We can't pass it on.
So I do support the passing a bonding bill. Unfortunately, in Minnesota, we know what can happen when we don't invest in our infrastructure. I used to take the 35W bridge to work and home every single day, and I drove on it the morning before it collapsed. Unfortunately, many Minnesotans lost their lives in that incident too. So we absolutely need to make sure that we have safe roads and safe bridges in Minnesota. I also do support investing in public transportation, and especially in buses and light rail that could run on clean energy for our future. That is the future of transportation in Minnesota, and it also makes it easier for people who live in Lakeville and commute to the cities to get to and from work easily. We know with driving, there's a difference between people who drive a gas-efficient vehicle to get to work and someone who's driving an Escalade pulling their boat to get to the cabin. So there's a difference between necessity and luxury when we're talking about using gas. And I think that we can differentiate between those two by taking a more nuanced approach. So I would look at changing the way that we are charging for license plate renewal fees, making sure that tabs are less expensive for people who are using their car to get to work, and we could increase the price a little bit for people who are using their vehicles for luxury purposes. I also want to make sure that the gas tax doesn't penalize anyone for driving out of necessity to and from work. So the Minnesotans among us who are at the lowest income or working poor, we could also provide some sort of a tax credit or reimbursement for them at the end of the year to help offset the cost of that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to closing remarks. Each candidate will now have 90 seconds for closing remarks, and we'll begin with Megan Olson.
Thank you to the Chamber for hosting this forum and educating Lakeville voters about all of us here tonight, and thank you to everyone tuning in at home, all of you who are here as well. And I'm glad you're all staying healthy and safe. I know there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think a big theme of the conversation tonight has stemmed around the future, not only the near future, but the far future, and future generations that are going to be growing up in this pandemic and becoming contributing members of society over the next few decades. And so I think a really important thing I wanted to touch on was that we absolutely need a financial literacy requirement bill passed. We need to educate our high school students on the basics of mortgages, credit, investing, budgeting, all that good stuff that maybe they're not getting at home. I was lucky enough to have a grandpa who started me off with a 401k the day I turned 18, was really into educating me on all of those issues and life things and on how to be a constructive member of society. And so I sincerely believe that that needs to be something that's passed in 2021 for the future of our generation. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't know that was 90 seconds.
Thanks again for hosting this forum. Balance at the state capitol is important. Without it, we would have a $12 billion tax increase, government-run health care, $68 million in cuts to nursing homes, higher energy costs, and cities would be allowed to defund the police. I believe that Minnesotans are served best by working together to find common ground solutions. I have the experience as a proven and responsible community leader who puts people first over politics and gets things done. Now is a time for meaningful reform. We need to think more creatively, promote innovation, and allow more freedom. I'll use my business acumen to tackle tough issues like getting the economy back on track, strengthening our families and businesses, and protecting past taxpayers and preserving our freedoms, keeping us safe, promoting equality and mutual respect. I was honored to receive a 4-star education award and Autism Hero of the Year, and you can find out more information at rozpeterson.com. Thank you.
Friends, over the last 19 years in Lakeville, we've gotten to know each other. Like you, Patty and I chose to raise our family here and even a business. Thank you for the honor it is to represent your values and dreams in St. Paul. I'm reminded of the hopes as I have talked to thousands of you this summer, like Anne and her husband out on a walk with their newborn child, and there are 2 other young kids and a puppy in tow. And there was James, a father who came out of his apartment to see who his 2 boys and the neighbor kids were talking to. That was me. And the kind lady from church, who I didn't really know, her name is Suzanne, she saw that I was in the neighborhood and quick ran to her garage, grabbed her Kosnick yard sign, and put it out there to show her support. I wish I could share more with you, but as different as the backgrounds of Annie, James, or Suzanne are, I hear similar aspirations and dreams for their future. We live in a special place, Lakeville, Minnesota, with special people and families that care about each other. I'm well aware of the challenges facing our state and the divisions pulling at us, and how much more pronounced those divisions are with COVID. But don't forget that there is so much more that we share together that I think unites us. The values of working hard, a quality education, charity to each other, and compassion for the least among us. These are the values that guide me and bind us as a community. I've worked hard for you and would be honored to again earn your vote as we face the challenging roads ahead.
Thank you.
So I am running for office, not to be able to say cute things, but because I'm so passionate about the community I live in. I am a mom who wants my kids to grow up in safe and healthy community, like I was able to as a kid. I want to make sure that we are addressing public safety by actually doing something about gun violence in Minnesota and by reforming the police, not defunding it. And I also want to make sure that we are funding public schools because we are asking our schools and our teachers to do so much. During this pandemic, we have seen the role that our schools and our teachers play in society. We have become a catch-all for everything that we don't address at the larger systematic level. Teachers today are not only educators, we are in charge of counseling our children. We are making sure that our kids are fed at school and on the weekends. We send food home with families. We are social workers. And now this year we are healthcare workers on the front lines dealing with this pandemic day to day. It is not about being cute or saying cute things. It is about making sure that we are making a real difference in our community and taking seriously the issues that are affecting us. I hope that you will vote for me this fall as I work to make Lakeville a better community. Thank you.
Thanks again to the Lakeville Chamber for hosting this discussion. It's too brief. We need more time. These are weighty issues we're talking about. And so I would just implore anybody who has further questions directly for me to contact me directly. I would love to speak with you in depth. And I just also wanted to say that our country, as I mentioned in my opening statement, is at a crossroad in this election. I said earlier that we need stable leadership. We need experience and calm governance. The pandemic poses a continuing obstacle to a return to normal. But Minnesotans are resilient. Politics are politics. But right now, the best thing we can do is reach out to our neighbors and commit to work together. I will continue to listen to you, and I thank you all for being here tonight and for tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the businesses and residents of Lakeville and the Lakeville Area Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to thank each of the candidates for your passion to serve and the perspective that each of you brings. This has been a very impressive group, and thank you for presenting tonight. I would also like to thank the City of Lakeville and staff for use of the facility and recording tonight's event. All forums will be rebroadcast on LGTV Channel 180 on Charter and Channel 187 on Frontier and online at lakevillemn.gov under the Media Center tab. You may also contact the Chamber of Commerce at 952-469-2020 for the link. The Lakeville Area Chamber of Commerce has not and will not endorse any candidate in any race this year. Lastly, remember to vote Tuesday, November 3rd. Thank you all for being here, and have a good evening.